From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Todd Barrows, program specialist with the Kansas Farm Service Agency, has an update on the USDA Pandemic Assistance for Producers program, which was announced last week. Todd walks us through what this program means for producers and when those eligible might receive payment. We'll also listen in on a recent BCI Cattle Chat that covers bull soundness and strategic genetic decisions, as well as bull management. And for this week's wildlife segment, former K-State wildlife specialist Charlie Lee looks at a recent field study that might bring to light another possibility for biological control of prairie dogs on rangeland. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. The USDA Pandemic Assistance for Producers program was announced last week by Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, and there are several components to that program. Here to discuss the nuts and bolts of the assistance program is Todd Barrows. He's a program specialist with the Kansas Farm Service Agency.
This program will be monumental as emphases are being placed on outreach to small and socially disadvantaged producers, specialty crop and organic producers, and others. However, today I want to focus on the known part of this announcement of aid, and that is through the CFAP program. FSA will reopen the sign-up for CFAP 2 beginning April 5th for at least 60 days.
So walk us through that then. What will that mean for producers?
Yeah, the biggest emphasis on reopening sign-up is because some specialty crop growers of fruit crops, vegetables, or nut trees, did not realize that they were eligible for benefits under the sales commodities portion of CFAP 2 and missed out on the original application period. Those producers can now enroll as timely submitted, and so we will be accepting those applications in our field service centers, and we can get those producers enrolled for these all-important program benefits. Remember, producers, that this is a certification program, and producers in this category would certify their reported sales by commodity for the 2019 tax year based on their IRS income filing. Producers can include as sales income from crop insurance indemnities received, the NAP program, which is a non-insured assistance program through FSA, or the WIP Plus payments for the 2019 crop year. To be clear, producers who did not file for program benefits under CFAP 2 can now have a second chance to apply for those benefits. And producers who may have filed their applications late or after the December 11th cutoff date can now be considered timely filed under this CFAP 2 program and receive all important benefits. And finally, Jeff, if producers previously filed a CFAP 2 application, they do not need to refile now.
So there's also been a lot of talk about additional funding or top-up payments. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, top-up has been a popular subject, and our phones have been ringing off the hook with questions about the top-up payments. And most importantly, about top-up program is it doesn't take interaction from producers. It will just happen. But top-up payments are applicable for both livestock cattle producers and also crop producers with flat rate crops or price trigger crops under the CFAP 2 program for the 2020 program year or crop year. So let's first talk about cattle producers. So cattle producers will receive a payment per head based on inventory reported numbers of cattle on hand under the CFAP 1 program that was owned between April the 16th and May 15th of 2020. Payments will be automatically processed, as I mentioned, takes no interaction with amongst the producer or by the producer, and those payments will begin being processed this coming weekend, April the 2nd, and then producers should start seeing those funds show up in their bank accounts by April the 10th. Now, there are 5 different categories for the top-up payment for cattle, those being feeder cattle less than 600 pounds, they'll get $7 per head. Feeder cattle over 600 pounds, we're looking at $25.50 per head. Slaughter-fed cattle, that's $63 per head. And when we're talking about slaughter-fed cattle, that would be cattle in feedlots that were over 1,250 pounds. And then we have slaughter-mature cattle, which is $14.75 per head. In that category, we're talking about older cows, bulls that may be just going to slaughter because they're out of their useful life as a breeding animal. And then last of all, you got all other cattle, which would be $17.25 per head. Mainly in that category, you do have your active or your breeding stock.
And as you mentioned, there's also money for crop producers.
Yeah, there is. And that's the second point that I wanted to bring up. Under top-up, there are money for your crop producers, and that is going to be $20 per acre based on the eligible planted acres during the 2020 growing season. Like the livestock cattle producers, this requires no action from the producer, and payments will be again processed over the weekend starting on April the 2nd, and producers can expect to start seeing those payments reach their bank accounts shortly after or around April the 10th. Eligible crops for that crop producer include alfalfa, barley, corn, cotton, hemp, peanuts, rice, sorghum, soybeans, sunflowers, and wheat. But again, it was based on your 2020 plantings.
You did not mention anything about swine, and previously there had been some talk about swine producers receiving a top-up payment.
Yeah, that's still being discussed at the national level. There was a lot of talk early on about additional payments for swine producers and contract growers of swine, but at the present moment, that top-up payment remains on hold. I assure you, again, that the national leadership, both at the USDA level and the swine industry leaders, are in communication, and they're going over regulations right now to make sure that the needs of the swine industry are going to be captured before we announce any further details on swine.
This has been some helpful information and a lot of information. Any other areas to discuss under this pandemic assistance package?
One other thing I would like to bring up, Jeff, and while there's not as many in terms of numbers of producers affected, particularly for our state, it still is going to be instrumental to the producers that it affects, and that is their USDA is working on some finalizing decisions for CFAP additional assistance for both producers of pullets in the poultry industry and then also for turfgrass sod producers across the state.
And as we close out this segment on Coffee Talk, some other reminders for our listeners?
Yeah, I would be amiss if I didn't put in a couple plugs before I get away today. That first one is just to let the listeners know that I will be participating in an upcoming webinar going over this pandemic assistance for producers and the CFAP payments that are going out. That webinar will be Wednesday, March the 31st at 1 o'clock Central Time and is being conducted with Robin Reed and myself. There is no fee, but it does require a registration, and that registration can be found at agmanager.info. The other thing that I wanted to mention before I got away is there is an upcoming deadline under the Quality Loss Assistance Program of April 9th. And this program, the sign-up has been going on for a while, so most producers have taken advantage of that are eligible for the program. But just to put a plug out there one last time, that there is this upcoming deadline. Quality Loss Assistance Program is for crop quality losses suffered from flooding, drought, excessive moisture, tornado in the 2018 and 2019 program years. And if I could simplify that and put it in simplistic terms, when you talk about quality loss, that is a price loss due to quality grading standards for a particular crop.
And as you mentioned, you don't want anybody to miss out on a potential payment.
That's correct. And the last thing I'll just say, Jeff, just as a all-important reminder, more information on not only the programs we're covering today, but all the programs that FSA administers can be obtained through contacting your local USDA Service Center and FSA offices across the state. There's also access to a lot of program information on farmers.gov on the internet. And I will say that while our office doors may be closed due to the public due to COVID restrictions, I can assure you that our employees are working and we are open for business, and they can be reached by phone or email. So if you have not done so, this would also be a perfect time to ask your local service centers to sign up for text alerts for those smartphone users, because as additional program regulations are finalized and are announced, those that have text alerts, we do send those out to make you aware of those new regulations and new program availability. So just a plug for that.
And as you point out, you never know when those are going to hit. Sometimes they just come out.
That's exactly right. So it's a tool that we've incorporated with the times that we're in, and it's been successful for a lot of users. And if you haven't signed up for it, it's just a good tool to have in your toolbox as a producer.
Todd, thanks for the update, and good luck with the webinar tomorrow. Maybe people will have a chance to see you via Zoom so they can maybe see what you look like as well.
Absolutely. It's always a good time and good experience to work with the people at K-State and Robin Reed as economists. And we hope that it will be informative and alleviate a lot of questions that producers may have, and therefore let them know that the money will be coming, and we're working diligently and as quick as possible to get these all-important benefits out as the producers are right now starting up in a busy season as far as planning and spring crop preparation.
That's Kansas Farm Service Agency Program Specialist Todd Barrows with an update on the USDA Pandemic Assistance for Producers program. Again, for more information about the program, contact your local FSA office. Agriculture Today is back after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. Recent BCI Cattle Chat podcasts from the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University have focused on bulls, and that's raised a few questions. Today, veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, along with K-State Research Assistant Professor Phillip Lancaster and guest Flint Hills cattle rancher Debbie Lyons-Blythe, will answer some of those questions.
And the first one I really like. So I've got two identical bulls. They look identical, same breed, same characteristics. So I'm basically picking based on their breeding soundness exam. One bull was tested at 20 months of age with an above average scrotal circumference. One bull was tested at 10 months of age with an average scrotal circumference. Both passed their BSE. Which bull would you choose and why?
So it's a 2-year-old bull, right? And one of them hasn't been tested since he was 10 months old. I would be prejudiced against that bull because it's been too long since we've really evaluated his breeding soundness. You know, I had my same dollars and I'm going to go buy one of these bulls. I'd buy the one that has more recently been evaluated by a breeding soundness exam. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is a little bit more tricky, and I have to communicate carefully, is most breeds in the United States have done a really excellent job of selecting for adequate scrotal circumference in bulls. That was really a problem we identified a few years ago, particularly in certain breeds. Scrotal circumference at a yearling age is tied with age at puberty, both of that bull and his daughters that you might want to keep. And so having better than average scrotal circumference is desirable. But I want to point out, though, that we've been making progress for several decades in this area so that average is probably good enough, in that if I went into an NBA team and only wanted the above average players for my backstreet game, I would have missed a lot of really good players just because they're below average for NBA standards, they'd be great for my team. And so there's a lot of bulls that are below the 50th percentile that their scrotal circumference is fine, not a problem at all. They can perform exactly what I want to perform. So I don't really put my cutoff at average. I put my cutoff at below average. So I'm kind of avoiding those bulls that are in the very bottom few percentile of scrotal circumference. But that means that most bulls in most breeds have an adequate scrotal circumference for what I want. So then I rely on other characteristics, including the rest of the breeding soundness exam, the semen evaluation, the physical exam, those types of things to kind of differentiate these bulls that I'm getting ready to buy.
So follow up to this question. What do you think about not semen testing yearling bulls, but delaying that until they're 14 months old, 16 months old?
Well, I'll answer that easily as a veterinarian. Yeah, I like 14-month-old bulls way better than 11-month-old bulls. And anybody that's been involved with testing, if you're a veterinarian testing young bulls or a purebred producer that's selling young bulls, we're doing the testing oftentimes because of how it aligns with getting bulls sold before the next breeding season. They're right around that 12 months of age, a little bit earlier, a little bit later, and they are just right going through puberty. It'd be like assessing young boys right before their freshman year of high school and trying to determine how good of a football player they're going to be as a senior. It's not a perfect prediction. Now, if I can wait until they're a sophomore, I have a whole lot better prediction of how they're going to be as a football player as a senior. It's still not perfect, but it's better. And to me, that's my scenario. That 14-month-old bull, he's more like a sophomore. Almost all of them have already gone through puberty, and I can really assess them. When I'm doing it really young, I may miss some excellent fertility bulls that are just weeks, not months, but just weeks behind their peers. I will test younger bulls, but what I say is I don't necessarily fail them. I fail to pass them, meaning that I'm not going to be prejudiced against a high school boy that doesn't look like a linebacker as a freshman. I'm going to wait until he's a little bit older to say, yeah, you can play varsity linebacker or not. And so he stays on the team. We just evaluate him a little bit later to see what position he belongs in. The problem is a lot of times, the purebred producer, we do bull testing on one day. And so I've got bulls that range from 11 to 13 months of age. And I just don't want to be overly hard on the 11 and 12-month-old because some of that is just age. So among bulls, I want them all to reach puberty by 12, 13 months of age. And they really, most of them should. But on breeding soundness day, I've got a fairly good range of ages, and I want to treat that appropriately.
I think what you're saying is if they have reached puberty at that stage, all good. If they haven't reached puberty at that stage, they still can be a good fertile bull, and they may fit into somebody's operation. And there are times that early puberty may be important, maybe to your operation, maybe not. And we'll talk about that here in a minute on how we figure out which of those is most important. Last one, and I want to address this a little bit because I think this is a good question. We talked about scrotal circumference measurements, and we talked about the importance of that, and we just emphasized that as we talked through that once they pass, there could still be some differences. But different people measure. And Bob, if you and I went out and measured scrotal circumferences, how close do you think we'd be?
Between people, it can be a little bit different. Up to a centimeter or two difference is not unusual between veterinarians. And so one of the questions is, do we need a more standardized tool? And so there have been some people that have come up with kind of standardized tape measures that put more of a consistent amount of pressure on. And I like those. I think they're fine. I think a lot of it has to do with, I think I'm pretty consistent myself, and I think you're pretty consistent yourself. And if a producer and a veterinarian, the same veterinarian is evaluating a herd over time, as long as that veterinarian is consistent, I think you're getting good information. But, we've got a lot of multi-veterinarian practices, and then something that's a little more standardized may be helpful. So I would just put it back to, well, it depends on the situation. I haven't broken down and bought one of the nice, new, expensive, consistent ones because I'm only assessing myself. I'm not going across veterinarians. But if I was in a multi-person practice, I might be interested in that.
So it's not a perfect system, but it's a piece of the puzzle. If you say, boy, this doesn't align with how the bull looks or any other quality of the bull, then well, maybe we should remeasure it. Or if it aligns with everything else you're seeing, we're not making decisions solely based on scrotal circumference.
Right.
Last thing I wanted to visit about, and Debbie, I think this will be of interest to our listeners, is we've talked some about picking bulls from our perspective, right? From the health perspective or from the nutrition or from the economic. When we think about it from a strategic level, if I'm a new customer and I come to you and I say, hey, I'm interested in, we'll say I'm interested in your bulls. How do I pick the right bull for my operation out of the ones you have available?
Yeah. So I sell private treaty only. I don't have a sale, and I've been involved in a sale before, but I still think that these things are valid. These questions and this conversation is valid even if you go to a sale. So you should call and discuss things before the sale. Don't just go sale day. For a person coming to my ranch that wants to look at bulls, my first question is, what do you do with your calves? And how do your cows look? What traits do you need? Do you sell at weaning time? Do you maintain ownership? Do you keep heifers back? What kind of cows are you breeding? Do you have any heifers, or are they all good, solid, big cows? What do your cows weigh? So my specific conversation before we even go out and look at the bulls is just wondering, what kind of cow herd they've got and what are they doing with their calves. And then we'll go out and look at the bulls as a group and kind of start highlighting based on their information, their EPDs, highlighting ones that I think would fit for their program. And then we'll pull off, 5 to 10 bulls specifically so that they can evaluate them in a separate pen aside from the whole group. One of the things is just helping them understand EPDs. Sometimes we get new EPDs all the time, and different breed EPDs are, differences. And so I just kind of explained to them what the new EPDs are and which ones I feel are the most important for what kind of cow herd and what they do with their calves.
Well, and I think that's the key, is it goes to your herd, right? So Bob might come and I might come, and you might send us to two different bulls because of our goals or what our plans are. Some folks buy bulls, multiple bulls every year. Some folks buy a bull a year. Some folks buy a bull every couple years, depending on what your herd size is and what your requirements are. And I think finding a partner that you can have those discussions with, that you can say, hey, here's one of the things I'm thinking about. Here's what I'm looking at. What makes sense for my operation is really important.
Yeah. Since we've got the sports analogy going, I'm going to continue it and say a really good football team or a really good track team has a bunch of good athletes, but they don't do the same thing. As we're approaching track season, we've got shot putters, we've got sprinters, we've got long distance runners. Each of them are excellent athletes in their field, but you can't have the fastest sprinter who is also your best shot putter. There are traits that are just going to be antagonistic. And so I don't ignore everything else, but I align what I need to get the best balanced team. Because as a team, I want kind of that decathlete that's really good at a lot of things, but I get there by picking the bulls that just complement what I need and what I do well and what I need some help with.
From a recent BCI Cattle Chat podcast produced by the Beef Cattle Institute at Kansas State University, that's the team of veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, along with K-State Research Assistant Professor Phillip Lancaster, and their guest, Debbie Lyons-Blythe. The full discussion is available online at ksubci.org. Ag Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State Research and Extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, starting off with the Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report for the week ending March 28th, there were 2.2 days suitable for fieldwork, according to USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. Topsoil moisture supplies rated 4% very short, 8% short, 72% adequate, and 16% surplus. Subsoil moisture supplies rated 6% very short, 14% short, 71% adequate, and 9% surplus. Field crops report winter wheat condition rated 4% very poor, 15% poor, 31% fair, 43% good, and 7% excellent. Well, according to the most recent grain market report from the International Grains Council, global grain production in 2020-2021 is forecast to increase to a record 2.224 billion tons. Output in 2020-21 expected to be 39 million tons larger than the previous year and 9 tons higher than last month's projection. The IGC said that record harvests are forecast for wheat, 774 million tons, and corn, 1.139 billion tons. Despite the projections for record production, the IGC expects a fourth consecutive drawdown of world carryover stocks to 609 million tons, down 8 million tons from 2019-2020. The council said the drawdown is entirely due to further depletion of corn inventories. Trade is forecast to reach a record 416 million tons, up 22 million from the previous year, with record-level shipments of wheat and corn anticipated. How might various and, in many cases, non-lethal protection practices prevent predators from attacking livestock? That's the focus of an ongoing USDA APHIS study. Rod Bain reports.
Ever heard of integrated livestock protection? What is it?
An integrated system basically uses the best tools at the best time to use those tools.
Tools and strategies that in many cases can be non-lethal in their efforts to reduce or prevent depredation of livestock by wildlife. That according to Julie Young, a researcher with USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service Wildlife Services. Her colleague, Elizabeth Miller, says there is a mixture of non-lethal protection tools available to livestock producers.
Some of the tools that maybe are less traditionally employed would be things like range riding or fladry or electrified fencing or permanent fencing. Those are some of the most popular.
Miller acknowledges that ILPs are not a one-size-fits-all approach.
If you consider all the different types of terrain, all the different types of predators, even size of allotments or accessibility of maybe summer grazing allotments, the list of variables goes on and on and on. And it really makes each individual depredation risk a unique scenario to evaluate.
The pros and cons of integrated livestock protection tools in any one particular setting has been part of ongoing study. Julie Young says research on different components has taken place for years now, such as guard dogs and the practice of a fence line with flags, perhaps even electricity, known as fladry.
A few years ago, USDA did a study on livestock guard dogs and found them to be highly effective. But even though sometimes they can't solve every problem, we did a study a couple of years ago then on fladry and found pretty good success on that, where people were setting up turbo fladry and they weren't having depredation in the year that it was set up compared to the year before when they didn't have that.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And finally, in this week's Milk Lines, K-State dairy specialist Mike Brooks says the safety restrictions implemented for COVID-19 last year prevented many dairy producers from opening up their operations to the public as part of National Dairy Month in June. However, things are looking more promising this year. With that in mind, Mike says producers need to start making plans now to decide how they want to educate the public about the dairy industry and their specific operation.
Today, I'd like to speak to our Kansas dairy farmers concerning opening your farm to the public again. You know, with all the regulations that we've had during COVID, we really missed celebrating June as Dairy Month last summer for the most part. Many of our farms were closed due to local regulations and for many good reasons, but as we move out of many of those regulations, I think we do have an opportunity this summer to actually celebrate June as Dairy Month and maybe have some visitors on our farm if that's what we decide to do. Now, we'll probably still have some issues with sizes of crowds in certain areas and those sorts of things. I think in most areas we'll probably still be allowed to have small gatherings, maybe just a few of your friends over to look at some of the things that you're doing on your farm, as well as maybe taste some of the products produced from the milk from your dairy farm. So maybe feature some things that maybe they haven't tried before to try to get their interest back into the other things that they might be purchasing at the grocery store that are related to dairy. As you think about this, maybe one of the first groups that you should invite to the farm would be the family of your employees, if you have employees. And maybe you have a celebration, again, small gathering, that's within the guidelines that you have in your local area. Many times it's very important to celebrate things with your employees. So maybe that is one of the first groups that you celebrate with as far as June is Dairy Month. And again, it's a very important part of your operation to recognize their contributions, particularly in the last year. It's been very difficult on many farms. A lot of times there's probably been some times when we didn't really have enough people to get quite all the work done every day, and people put in extra hours in order to get things done as they needed to be. So take some time to celebrate that. Now, as you think about others that you might bring to your farm, again, I think the small gathering idea is probably an excellent way to do that. You'll do a better job of communicating what you're doing and the love that you have for the industry that you serve by doing that. Maybe there's some opportunities to partner with your local grocery store. Maybe there's some featured dairy products that they might want to have on sale on a particular week. Maybe an opportunity to taste some dairy products in the store with maybe you as a dairy farmer supporting that effort. So if people have questions about, how is milk produced? How do we feed dairy cows? What kind of care do we give to cows? Those types of things are very, very important as we educate the public as to what we do every day. And guess what? The best person to do that is someone who's actually doing it on a daily basis, a dairy farmer. And you're highly respected because you are a dairy farmer, and your opinion and the answers that you give are very, very important to those consumers. So as we approach Dairy Month, it's not too early to start thinking about it. Think about how you might open your farm, at least to a small extent, to the public, or how you might go out in your community, maybe at the local grocery store, and promote our dairy products. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that's a look at today's agricultural news. Agriculture Today is back after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so stay a minimum of 6 feet away from others and stay home if you can. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This time set aside on Agriculture Today to talk once again with former wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Charlie Lee. Charlie, you're going to share an anecdote today on what turned out to be an unexpected observation during a study of predation on prairie dogs. And it surprised folks involved in this study. What were the details?
Well, we know that predation can certainly affect the population dynamics of a prey species. Predators commonly stalk prey from concealed routes. They can attack quickly and frequently, avoid areas where you've got human observers. So documenting predation under natural conditions is actually fairly difficult. An adult American badger, which is a mustelid, a carnivore of western and central United States, very common throughout Kansas and the Great Plains, commonly hunts rodents such as ground squirrels or prairie dogs, but sometimes will eat amphibians, birds, reptiles, and occasionally even consume grain. Badgers commonly hunt at night, but they also hunt during the daylight hours in some situations. Those hunting techniques include they catch their victims above ground, or they're very good at digging burrows and excavating out potential victims that are inside. They sometimes bury their victims for later retrieval, and occasionally they interact with coyotes. Those are some issues that are known about badgers that are common in the literature in many locations. They're opportunistic generalists, and they can be specialists on certain periods or in certain type of habitats. But this was a project studying the ecology and the social behavior of Gunnison's prairie dogs in late spring and early summer in New Mexico. This was a report that was published in the Western North American Naturalist in 2020. During the project of observing prairie dogs, a female badger moved onto the study site with 2 juvenile offspring.
Again, unexpected here. This was not part of the plan.
This was not expected at all. They had set up a blind, which was basically a cubicle that they could hide in through the daytime, and just physically observed prairie dogs that had been captured and marked with small ear tags, as well as painted their fur with large numbers so that they could identify individual prairie dogs, and then they observed them from daylight to dusk throughout the spring and summer. After the female badger moved in, on 31 of the 33 research days there, they were able to document 1 or more predations by the adult badger, as well as the times of day when those predations occurred. I think it's interesting in that this badger was such a proficient predator of prairie dogs. Over the 33 days, that particular badger took a minimum of 100 prairie dogs. That they have documentation, either visual sightings or camera images of that female badger killing and returning 100 prairie dogs to one of 4 separate dens that female badger used over that 33-day period.
That's a whale of a predatory rate, isn't it?
Yeah, when they looked at rate, they estimated the size of that prairie dog colony and had a good information about the size, and estimated 7% of the adults and 7% of the juvenile prairie dogs from that colony were killed within 33 days by one predator. And certainly they didn't detect every predation event, but those were the ones that they captured. 62% of those captures were adult prairie dogs, and the badger captured 1 or more prairie dog every day of their observations except 2 through that trial. I think it's interesting to note that prairie dogs have lots of predators out there, including badgers. I have conducted work on prairie dogs for many years. It's very common to see badgers on prairie dog colonies, but I've never observed a badger killing a prairie dog. I've seen them dig after prairie dogs, but not come above ground, so I wasn't able to tell whether they were successful in capturing a prairie dog or not. But to have observers record 100 predation events by one badger within 33 days is just, to me, a remarkable feat, and it shows how efficient a carnivore can actually be.
How does that compare? Because there has been an effort to encourage ferret feeding on prairie dogs in the past. Do ferrets even come close to consuming prairie dogs at this rate?
No, black-footed ferrets are certainly a predator of prairie dogs, and many people think that historically black-footed ferrets controlled prairie dog populations. That's probably not the case, in that when we know black-footed ferrets can take one prairie dog about every 3 days or consume about 100 prairie dogs per year. They basically have the same kind of home range, about a square mile, maybe a little bit smaller than that than a badger does. But if a badger is consuming 100 prairie dogs once a month and a black-footed ferret is consuming 100 prairie dogs a year, some folks might want to start managing for badgers if they are serious about trying to use predation as a means to control prairie dog numbers.
Once again, it was an unintended consequence of this research, but nonetheless, a direct observation of just what sort of impact badger predation can have on a prairie dog colony. Charlie, interesting indeed. Thanks for sharing that with us today. Former wildlife specialist Charlie Lee of K-State Research and Extension along with us. Well, that closes out our Tuesday edition. Remember, if you happen to miss one of our broadcasts on any given day, you can still hear our replay, as each day it's posted in podcast form at this address, agtoday.net. Right there you can look into subscribing to the automatic download of the podcast as well, if that's something that interests you. Once more, at agtoday.net. Meantime, thanks for tuning in right here today, and for Jeff Wickman, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good day for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.